There's two, and I've talked about this many times before, but just as a way of grounding us in this particular talk, there's two ways to have a relationship with reality. There's the relative and there's the absolute. And the relative is dualistic. Um, Male, female, happy, sad, up, down. And so it's different than the absolute way. And it's got its own particular characteristics. And being able to experience the world in a relative sense is absolutely necessary. Um, and what I'm going to talk about today is questions without answers. And so questions and answers are something that's vital if we are experiencing the world in a relative sense, right? If I'm lost and I pull into a service station and ask directions, it's very important that I get an answer. And that's from the relative sense. There's another way of looking at this, and that's from the absolute sense. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the relationship between it's like form or emptiness, the relationship between the relative and the absolute. So to start with, Zen is not something that we believe in. It has no absolute truth. And in a sense, on one level, on the absolute level, there are no truths. There are only opinions. And we could say that Zen is a practice that embraces questions with an open mind. This is very similar to bearing witness, right? When we bear witness to a particular situation, we enter with an open mind. We don't enter, or we try to do our best not to enter with a bunch of fixed ideas or holding on to the truth. So we say that an open mind is a mind that has endless possibilities. And it expands us, right? It's not doesn't confine us to a little box that's defined by our opinions and our answers. Um, just a little haiku. How many hands have turned the rusty old doorknob? So there you have a question. And is it possible to come up with an answer? What is the sound of one hand? Same as the koan. I mean, same as the haiku. So in our practice, we frequently encounter questions that defy answers. And I don't know how familiar you are, we've talked about it, some probably more people more than others, but in koan practice, many of the koans are like this. The koan asks something which is very hard to provide an answer for. And the classic one that is probably known by most people is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Now, see if you noticed what happened to your mind when you're asked the question that appears to have no answers. What is the sound of one hand? Another one is, tell me, what is the color of mu? And mu comes from the koan, which is, does a dog have Buddha nature? And what is the color of this mu? And then who is it that's asking these questions? Is it enough to look at me and come up with an answer from the relative sense? Or to have a complete answer, is it also necessary to take this up from the absolute sense? So who am I? Right? I'm a Zen teacher. I'm a male. I come from Clinton, New Jersey. And these are all the little aspects, the little boxes that if we accumulate them in the relative sense, we or you can describe and know who I am in the relative sense. I'm a sum total of all these boxes, all these ideas, all these answers. From an absolute sense, there is no me, right? They're not singled out. Everything is one. And now this is an experience, so describing it is going to be very difficult. But there's a way to see me as part of the whole. It's like looking at individuals in our Sangha and then seeing the Sangha as a group, as a Sangha, with no particular one standing out. It's all one Sangha. So when this happens, when we're offered a question that there is no answer to or no apparent answer, a lot of time, like even this even happens in our everyday lives. Something comes up and we don't know what to do. It's whether it's a family problem or something at work. A lot of times we'll say, well, why don't you sit with that? And sit with that means empty yourselves of all the opinions and all the ideas. This is like bearing witness, and open everything up without being confined by answers. Open everything up. And like I've said many times, when you see all the ingredients of a situation, you're much more likely to behave in a helpful way, a positive way. So we may sometimes discover that the question is not seeking an answer, but looking for an expression, not an answer, but a way that it's expressed. Now, sometimes the teacher will say, don't tell me, show me. It's about getting out of our heads. So who is it that's listening to my talk? Did you notice where your mind went when I asked this question? So who is it that's talking to you? So is this a sum total of the boxes that get accumulated about who Sensei Carl is? Or is Sensei Carl not an individual, but part of a whole Sangha, right? Now, there's just two different ways, right? It's two sides of the same hand, relative form. So there's no answer to the question that's right or wrong, right? It's just from a different vantage point. From the absolute, it's just the Sangha. And from the individual part, the part that's made up of boxes of identity, then it's Carl with all my attributes. Now, there's a poet, I think how you pronounce his name is Rilke, and he's a poet and he's also a novelist. And he wrote a poem which was entitled Living the Questions. And this is part of the poem. I would like to beg you to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answers. Now, in Zen, we say if you attain the truth, throw it away because there's nothing to hold on to. As soon as we think we've found an answer, let it go. Now, the process of not focusing on answers runs counter to all that we have been taught. And we're deeply conditioned to find answers, to find solutions, to determine good and bad, and so forth. Right? That's the normal process of the mind. Zen practice, though, expands that. It offers another way to receive a question. Again, they're not in opposition. They can work together. We enter into a situation bearing witness, right? With an empty mind, an open mind, letting all the ingredients arise. And then from that open place, we respond. We can take action. We can do something. But it's not confined to an opinion that we have or a truth that we hold. It's a result of taking into account everything clearly. Now, devoting ourselves to a practice that does not emphasize answers, therefore can be very difficult because we are allowing ourselves to surrender our most basic way of being in the world, right? Think about it. Every day we encounter questions, we provide answers, and that's what is our normal way of being. But there's another way to experience life. So we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to having the rug pulled out from everything that is comfortable, secure, and familiar. And when this happens, there is nothing in the usual sense to hold us up. Falling down becomes inevitable. Now, this is metaphoric, but also literal. And the deeper you go into practice, you will experience this. But this vulnerability, this falling down, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's part of the trip. Now, there's an old Christian story attributed to the Desert Fathers, and it touches on vulnerability and the humanity of this experience. And in this story, a monk asks one of the fathers, "What am I to do since I have fallen?" And the father replied, "Get up." "I did get up, but I fell again," the monk said. "Get up again," said the father. "I did, but I must admit that I fell once again. So what should I do?" "Never fall without getting up," the father concluded. Now, there's a famous Indian Zen master, Dharma, and his claim to fame is that he brought Zen from India to China. And he would often say, Dharma would often say, "Knock down 7 times, get up 8." Now, this is a wonderful guidance for living our lives. You know, how many times do we get knocked down and we stay there? We get discouraged, we get depressed. But if we live in the spirit of getting knocked down, is part of the ride. It's part of the way in which we learn. And that our work is to get up and use the experience that we've encountered. Now, of course, that's easier said than done, but that's the focus of one aspect of Zen practice is knock down once, get up twice. So this instability and vulnerability, as I said, are what we let ourselves in for when we sit down on our cushions in earnest. And so while this may be difficult, even scary, sometimes we may discover that letting go of answers, of truth, will allow us to become deeply intimate with life, at one with life. So another haiku, which has to do with this clarity, this seeing directly. Han Shan is a famous Zen poet, and he used to wander the mountains. The mountains were the mountain range that he was in were called the Cold Mountains. So he was the Cold Mountain poet, and so he's in this poem, in this haiku. clear like spring water, free as a floating cloud, Han Shan sips his tea. Right? So that's the mind that's open. That's the mind that's not attached to answers only. So, by way of ending, Zen master Sun San, who is a Korean Zen master, he used to have a saying. He used to say, keep keep your don't know mind. And that's very similar to what Suzuki Roshi from the San Francisco means when he says, keep your beginner mind, right? A don't know mind and a beginner's mind don't have all the answers. They're wide open and they receive questions in an open way, taking into account all ingredients. So again, when we leave today, let's be sure to keep a don't know mind. Thank you.